and welcome to Caterpillar Cross Stitch. My name is Ford, and this week I'm going to be talking to you about some of the specialized needles that you might find it useful to have in your cross stitching bag. I'm just going to jump right in instead of doing any other housekeeping, as long as you promise to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave me a comment when you're done. It doesn't cost you anything and it makes a big difference for me, so I'd really appreciate it. Now the first thing to note is that the most commonly used needle for cross stitching, which we call a tapestry needle or a blunt needle, is actually kind of a specialized needle, but for us it's the standard, so I'm not going to consider it as a specialized needle for the purposes of today's video. But the things that distinguish that tapestry needle are that it has a large eye in order to give you room to put several strands of floss through it, and that it has no sharp point on it. It has a blunt tip. That's because we don't usually want to pierce the fabric with our needles during cross stitching. We want to find our way through the weave of the fabric in order to be able to have it at regular intervals on the weave. So that's why we use these blunt tip needles for cross stitching. But there's a whole bevy of other needles that are out there, some that are specifically intended for cross stitching and some that are actually intended for other needlework crafts, but that can be very useful in certain circumstances and special circumstances for cross stitching. And those are the ones I'm going to be talking about today. So the first one I'm going to be talking about is one that you've probably seen me talk about before if you follow the channel, and that is a ball tip needle. You can usually get these at your local needlework shop, or you can get them online. They're a little bit more expensive than a regular cross stitching needle, but for the circumstances that they're great for, they're really worth the extra expense. So if you take a close look at this one, you'll notice that rather than just having a little blunt tip there, this one has a little spherical nodule on the end of the needle. It tapers down to almost a point, and then it has a little kind of bead on the end. That's the ball of the ball tip. Now this is different from a ball point needle, which is a different kind of needle that doesn't have any taper on it, and usually actually refers to a kind of needle that you would use in a sewing machine for cross stitching. But they usually have a smaller eye, so they're not amazing for cross stitching. So you want to keep an eye out for that if you were ordering one of these. Hey, take just a second right now and go sign up for the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Stitch Club email newsletter. As soon as you sign up, you'll get an ebook with our top 10 cross stitching tips, plus 10 free PDF cross stitch patterns worth £60, including a year-long temperature tracker pattern, which is really cool. You'll also get news of all the upcoming Caterpillar projects, stitch-alongs, events, retreats, socials, that kind of stuff. So hit that link down there so you don't miss out on that. Another kind of needle that you might find yourself using occasionally for cross stitching is a classic embroidery needle. Embroidery needles are pretty similar to tapestry needles. They still have a pretty big eye, though not quite as big as the tapestry needle does. And then they have a sharp point. They also have a gradual taper all the way from the tip to the end, which helps you kind of ease your way through thicker layers of fabric when you're doing embroidery. Because we're usually working our way through a loose weave of fabric in cross stitching, we don't usually want that from a needle. So the embroidery needle is useful for a couple of specific circumstances for me. One is when I'm doing back stitching. So when I'm doing back stitching, I'm almost invariably working with only one strand of floss, so the smaller eye on the embroidery needle is not going to be a problem for me. The narrower body and gradual tapering will also make it a little bit easier for me to sort of find my way around and through the stitches that are already there when I'm doing that back stitch as the last phase of my cross stitch project. But because they do have a sharp point, it makes it really easy to accidentally pierce your existing stitches or pierce through the fabric when you don't intend to. So I don't recommend using them for everyday cross stitching, only for those specific purposes. Another kind of needle that I like to keep on hand is called a chenille needle. This is also an embroidery needle, but it has a little bit different. You'll notice that it has a slightly bigger eye, both wider and longer, but it still has the sharp point. So this is normally used for things like ribbon embroidery or yarn embroidery when you need to have that big eye to be able to fit your medium through the fabric that you're stitching on. But when doing cross stitching, I really like to have these ones in order to do French knots because I need to have the multiple strands through there. Or when I'm doing fractional stitches and I need to be able to pierce through the fabric in the middle of a square, the sharp point and large eye on the chenille needle can really make that a lot easier. If you're not following the Caterpillar Cross Stitch social media channels, you're missing out on one of the best parts of this hobby, which is the community aspect of it. go join the Facebook group or go follow the Instagram, where there are tens of thousands of stitchers with thousands of years of experience that are really willing to share their wisdom. And it's also just great to be around other people, even virtually, who are into the same thing as you and can commiserate when things go bad and can celebrate with you when things go right. If you've ever tried to do a project that called for any sort of beads or embellishment, you probably discovered the problem that this next needle helps resolve, which is that those little seed beads that we use for embellishing cross-stitch projects have very small holes on them, and they're glass, so they're a little bit brittle if you try to force anything through that small hole. So even a small size tapestry or embroidery needle won't fit through there. So if you're trying to add beads to a project, you need a specialized needle for that. And that's where these beading needles can come in handy. They have a really nice long shank, which is actually really nice for being able to scoop up beads from your beading bowl. And then they don't get thicker along the length of them, and they don't get wider at the eye, so that if you can fit the point of the needle into the bead, you'll know that you can pass that bead all the way over the needle. So when doing any sort of project that calls for beads, that's where the beading needle can come in really handy. But as you can see, it's really, really skinny and really, really flexible. So it's easy to bend these out of shape. So you don't want to do, in fact, I just did that with this one. So you don't want to use them for your regular stitching, your cross stitches or your back stitch. You want to save the beads until the very last and then use your beading needle for those, because these beading needles are kind of delicate. And the next needle that I'm going to talk about is one that I've found useful in certain circumstances, but they're kind of polarizing. People either love them or they hate them. And that's this double point central eye tapestry needle from Boan. There are probably other manufacturers that make them as well. But these are really useful for certain things. So you can see this is just a standard size 24 tapestry needle, but instead of a butt at the end by the eye, you have another whole shank and point. So where these come in really handy is when you are stitching two-handed. When you have your project in a lap stand or a floor stand, you can take the thread down and bring it right back up without having to turn it around. So it can allow you to stitch much more quickly, which is really cool. There are some drawbacks to it though, which is that at the middle, that eye is pretty delicate, and it is pretty easy to break that if you put too much force on it. I also found that I frequently would accidentally stab through my working thread on the underside of my project while trying to do that return stitch, and it would cause hopeless tangles in my project. So you have to be really careful with that. But it allows you to stitch very, very quickly when stitching with two hands. It allows you to stitch with only one hand if you only have one hand, or if you only have the use of one hand with your project in a lap stand, which is fantastic. And because of the fact that you don't have to turn the floss around while it's on the underside, it greatly reduces the amount of twisting that happens in your thread. So you get fewer tangles, fewer knots, neater stitches, and you can work faster. So if you can get used to them and avoid making the mistake that I kept making, which was to pierce through my thread, then you might find them really, really useful. They're a little bit hard to find and kind of expensive, but they're definitely worth a shot if you like to stitch two-handed. Hey, you ready to try something new? Go check out Caterpillar Crochet. It's the same amazing supportive community that you're used to, plus beginner-friendly kits that make it super easy to get started. Come and join us on Facebook or on Instagram, or just click the links down there in the description so that you can follow along. The final kind of needle that I'm going to talk about is one that if you need it, you know you need it, and it's a really nice thing to have. Or maybe you do need it and you don't know, and that is a gold-plated tapestry needle. Most needles are plated in nickel, and there are some people who are allergic to nickel, and it will cause their fingertips to hurt, crack, and bleed. There are some people whose body chemistry creates a chemical reaction with the nickel plating, and their skin oils will just dissolve the nickel right off of the needle. I didn't really believe it when I first heard about it, but I've met some people for whom it's true, and they've shown me their needles. And you just, before very long, the iron core in the middle of the needle becomes visible, and the needle gets really rough, and it shreds up the fabric and the floss. It's wild. I'm glad it doesn't happen to me, but for people like that, or for people who are allergic to nickel, the gold-plated needles can be immensely useful because gold is highly unreactive. It won't react with any of your skin or body chemistry, and it's it's hypoallergenic. Almost no one is allergic to gold. So the 24 karat gold plating on this will make the needle last longer, keep it moving smoothly through the fabric, and prevent any sort of chemical reaction with your skin or allergic reaction with your skin. So again, they're a little bit more expensive than a regular needle, but honestly quite a bit less than the ball tip needles or the double eye needles, so not that bad. Now that pretty much covers the most common types of needles that I keep in my kit. What about you? Is there a different kind of specialty needle that you like to keep on hand for a specific purpose? Share it with us down there in the comments, and maybe somebody else can learn, and maybe I'll add a new tool to my own kit. But that is all I have for you this week. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you learned anything from me. I do want to thank you so much for watching. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, my name is Ford, and I will see you next week.